Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi Saurabh, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Carl. Happy to be here after a long time, actually, but I'm happy to be here. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to have you, and no better time to have Saurabh on the podcast than to discuss the nuclear energy, law that was signed a few weeks back. So we'll get into the nuts and bolts of what this means for India's sort of energy sector, specifically nuclear. We'll look at what the purpose of the act really is, and understand what are the implications for this, like broadly for the sector, for jobs. What does this mean for the private sector specifically? Because that's what I'm sure most of you would be interested in knowing. So, sort of like just to set the ball rolling, do you think this new development in the nuclear law has been something overdue? Like, you would know better that there might be other countries that have done this and have found success. So, do you think this was something long overdue as far as India is concerned?
Definitely, like long overdue. I think we are almost a decade and a half late, but better late than never. So again, I mean, India's kind of nuclear isolation was lifted after the 2008 waiver on nuclear commerce by the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Following that, the idea was that okay, India will be able to go full throttle on on the adoption of nuclear energy, and that it would just like set the ball rolling for more reactors and increase partnership with the US, etc., etc. But that was not meant to be. There were a few reasons about like for that. We can discuss that, but this is something that should have happened a long time ago, and I am quite happy that this has happened finally.
Yeah. So, sort of, if you could just maybe help me and maybe the listeners understand what are really the fundamental changes that the Shanti Act, brings about, and what are some of the fundamental differences or changes that you have observed from the previous Atomic Energy Act of '62 and the CLNDA of 2010?
Okay, so first of all, Carl, I don't think it is an act yet because it is yet to receive
Oh,
assent from the president. But yeah, I mean, the bill was passed, and I don't see any reason for it to not be signed into the law. So yeah, and just a minor comment. But yeah, I think the bill does two major things among a few small things. First is that it essentially ends the government monopoly in the nuclear energy sector. Before this bill, state owned enterprises, predominantly NPCIL, Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, was responsible for the nuclear power plants in the country. A few, like in the recent years, the law was amended to allow the joint venture of different state owned companies only to participate in this sector, but it was still restricted to the government sector. The bill now moves away from this and establishes a licensing regime in which the government is free to grant a license to own and operate nuclear power plants to any entity, public or private. So that is a very big reform and overdue for decades, in all honesty. And the second one was that I referred that we should have had a nuclear renaissance in India after the waiver from NSG, but that did not happen because I think the Fukushima accident in 2011 was something that I think just dampened the nuclear sentiment all across the globe. So that kind of slowed down. But I think a much bigger culprit for this was the CLNDA, the I think it's Convention on Nuclear Liability and Damage, something like that, Act passed in 2010. And this was quite anodyne, just your standard liability law, except there was a specific clause which said that the nuclear operators, in the event of an accident, I mean, they will be liable, but they have the right of recourse to hold their suppliers liable for compensation in specific circumstances.
Mm.
And this very small, like kind of like a sub clause of one clause in this bill, essentially kind of pushed away all foreign suppliers from India's nuclear
Mm.
commerce ecosystem, because they were worried that as suppliers they will be held responsible for any accidents, even when they are not kind of, they are not the ones operating the facility. And then, like if their stated product warranty or liability is over, then it is not fair to hold the suppliers liable. Now, obviously, there were clauses to ensure that like if there was any sabotage, or if there was any kind of very evident kind of sleight of hand from suppliers, then they will be liable, as is the case everywhere. But
Mm.
nowhere in the world where they have nuclear liability laws is this kind of no holds barred supplier liability there. And this
Mm.
actually, it's reflected on how badly we fumbled, because then I think in subsequent years, the government tried so hard to figure out a way to solve this issue short of amending the act, because it was not very kind of easy to do so. So the Ministry of External Affairs came up with a FAQs on the
Mm.
CLNDA Act, which kind of said that okay, no, the suppliers are in a way shielded, and if you and the supplier liability only kind of comes up if this was stated in the agreement clearly. So the government tried to kind of placate the foreign suppliers to kind of not thinking this was like a very risky bet.
But
But no one wants to burn their hands, and so the players stayed away. And that was one of the reasons why the discussions with the French for six reactors in Jaitapur in Maharashtra was lingering for so long, and then the discussions with the Americans for the Kowada nuclear project in Andhra Pradesh was also still kind of lagging. So these two are the major reforms which I think have really kind of fixed the two major flaws that were in our nuclear energy regime in India. Sorry for a long answer.
yeah, no, I think that was much needed, given that we'll dig a little deeper on the liability caps that you mentioned. So maybe just taking that head on, how adequate do you think these liability caps are? Like, especially in light of, even if sporadic, but the massive costs that the Fukushima and even Chernobyl, for instance, had an impact on. So, do you think the caps are adequate?
Yeah, so I mean, we have to kind of have a few things in perspective. So the liability caps, okay, I'll just explain this to our listeners.
Yeah,
So while the Act kind of clearly states that operators would be liable, it also says, which was in the old Act also, by the way. So this is not a new thing. This was so based on the capacity of the nuclear reactor. The liability has been capped. The operator liability has been capped at, I think, 3,000 crores. I mean, that's the highest ceiling.
that's right. Yeah.
So that's what it is. And the bill also mandates that the nuclear operators have to get insurance for their nuclear plants. There is also a UN Convention on Nuclear Accident. There is a liability fund in that which can be tapped into as well. There's also the Indian Nuclear Liability Fund. I think it is worth 1,500 crores or something, which the government puts in money for the unfortunate eventuality if there was any accident and the damages exceeded the capped liability. The operators also pull into that money. So the India. So we have three layers of insurance. First is operators' own insurance. Second is the insurance of the Indian nuclear liability pool. And the third one is the UN Convention of Nuclear Liability, which also has money. So there are three levels. And again, I mean, one could say that, okay, how much money is enough? Like, but the point being that Fukushima was unique because actually Japan is one of the few, if not the only country that actually has unlimited operator liability. Among almost all of the 50 odd plus nuclear operators in the world countries, almost everyone has a cap on operator liability. And
Mm.
this has to do with, insurance purposes. I mean, you actually cannot, insure something if you don't know what the liability is, like has to be a cap. But so that's the kind of an idea that the cap is not on, okay, you cannot claim any more damages. It is just that how would that damage be distributed among the different players?
Right. So I think the other interesting thing which that came out, some of the insights that you just laid out, Saurabh, was I think this dual permit system, right, which is you have a licensing structure which combines government licensing with the safety authorization from the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, the AERB. Could you tell us a little bit more about this regulation board and how is this not another government body regulating a sector? And or do you think that this has been streamlined to sort of help with encouraging more investment in the sector? So do you really see the AERB getting more tooth than it previously had?
Yeah, definitely. And Carl, I mean, for a sector as consequential as nuclear energy, I think we need regulation and we need a firm but an enabling regime which can facilitate, investments and increase the adoption of nuclear energy. So AERB, Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, was established by the Department of Atomic Energy as a body kind of associated with it, and AERB is the one that is responsible for ensuring that the nuclear power plants are up to speed with the latest nuclear regulations. It also certifies the safety aspects of nuclear plants, and so it is like the numero uno nuclear regulator. Now, what this bill does is actually gives it a statutory backing, which was not the case before. Before, it was kind of established as an order by the government, but this had no statutory kind of backing. So the bill changes that. It kind of has like a elaborate structure on who will be the members of this body, how will they be elected, their kind of like rules of business, and all of those things which are there for various independent regulators. This bill does that. So that's a very, very kind of a welcome sign. And I think, especially when you are allowing now private players to enter the market, an independent regulator is the need of the hour. I mean, imagine, I mean, even before this, for example, I mean, AERB was technically independent, but it was still linked to DAE, and DAE is the one that owns NPCIL, which is the one that runs all the nuclear plants in the country. So you have the regulator and then the one to be regulated, which is NPCIL, both
Mm.
under or linked to the same body, which
Mm.
obviously is a conflict of interest
Yeah.
and is something that should not be happening. So this reform is long overdue, and hopefully, I think we'll see a kind of a much more like forceful implementation of rules and regulations, at the same time ensuring that the safety and security of the nuclear plants, as well as the nuclear materials and all of those things are up to the highest standards.
Right. So another thing which I found interesting, sort of as you were speaking, was do you foresee or maybe did you want to see something which you felt was also maybe needed, like as far as the bill is concerned, and specifically reforms that would have removed structural barriers to the growth of nuclear energy in India. So are there maybe things you would have wished to see in terms of like major reforms that will help sort of declog the sector, for instance?
So I think these reforms are pretty far-reaching, actually.
Hmm.
So I mean, I was slightly skeptical how far the government would go. So they have actually delivered in the sense that, I mean, it's a bit late, but okay, I'll take it as a win. that I think deregulating, so all the three kind of major changes that we discussed are very, very important. And actually, let me put this into context, right? So, if our listeners would recall, India in last year's budget set up a goal of reaching 100 gigawatts of nuclear energy by 2047. India at the end of 2025 was 8.8 gigawatts. So more than 10 to 12 times expansion of nuclear energy in about 2 decades is extremely ambitious. And that would not have been possible without allowing more players into the mix, of allowing more competition, which hopefully and expectedly is going to increase players, increase investment, increase competition, which would then hopefully decrease costs and then promote more research and development. So that's one thing. But now, only welcoming players is not helpful, because we need reactors to, actually be in the nuclear plants. So, although we have Indian reactors and the highest capacity is a 700 megawatt reactor, but that would not be sufficient to reach the kind of goal that we are hoping. So it would be extremely important and more or less necessary that we'd have to kind of bring in foreign reactors, so from France, from Russia, from US, from Korea, or many other players. So, but that would not have happened if the nuclear liability regime was not fixed. So these two, I think, kind of reforms have really opened up the scope for nuclear energy. Now, obviously, there are, along with the announcement last year of the 100 gigawatts, there was also an announcement of the nuclear energy mission, which was 20,000 crores for R&D in advanced nuclear technologies, which includes the small modular reactors or SMRs. India is already building three different types of SMRs. One is 200 megawatt, one is 50 megawatts, and one is 5 megawatt gas cooled reactor. So this, coupled with new and emerging reactor types, including SMRs in many other countries, and the availability of private capital, would actually be a big plus for the sector. Now, coming to what it could have done, I mean, it perhaps is not something that a bill would do, but I would like to highlight a few things that are essential, if not necessary, to fulfill this kind of to reach this 100 gigawatt goal. So first of all, we are going to build like 50, 60 more reactors. That is great. But who will build those reactors? Do we have enough nuclear engineers? Do we have enough nuclear construction workers? Do we have enough inspectors? Do we have enough skilled labor who can like be part of these facilities? Do we
Mm.
have enough training facilities? And these things are not, like, you can't just create this human capital out of thin air. You will
Mhm.
have to have courses in universities. You have to make them attractive. You have to build these capacities, 3, 4, 5 years, like in advance, to make sure that the more actual capacity you are building will be able to be actually manned properly. So that's one. Second is, how are we going to deal with supply of uranium? We import uranium. We import a lot of uranium. Reserves in India are not as many, and even among the limited supply, we would prefer to keep it kind of not used, or prefer to use it for our strategic program. So we'll
Right.
have to import uranium. So do we have uranium agreements with enough countries? Is there enough supply? Do we need to look at more mines, both domestically or abroad? Investing. So those are the things. Something that should be there. Was also a talk of a strategic uranium reserve. That also is something that should be there. I mean, when we have a petroleum reserve to kind of take us through 3 to 6 months of our oil demand, I think having something like that for nuclear for a year or two worth of supply should be, I think, a very, very important factor to look into. And then we can't always just rely on private capital or foreign reactors, in the sense that there are various elements of the nuclear energy supply chain. So, for example, you need heavy water for the type of reactors that we have in India to act as a moderator in nuclear reactors. So, but heavy water production has not been opened for private sector. That is still the exclusive domain of the government. So with expected increase in nuclear reactor construction in the coming years, the government would have to spend more money to increase that capacity. So that is something that needs to happen as well. The fuel fabrication, fuel enrichment, all of these facilities which are dual use. So you have to be very careful in who do you give licenses to, who are able to be welcomed in these steps in the nuclear fuel supply chain. So the government will have to put its own money as well. So all of these things have to kind of go hand in hand. And I mean, the bill is almost a month old. So I hope that the government is going to look into a lot of these factors and make a more comprehensive kind of roadmap on how to achieve the 100 gigawatt goal. I should mention that there was a task force set up by the government on precisely this question, and they submitted their report to the Central Electricity Authority. I think in October, if I'm not wrong, and that report is excellent. I encourage you all to go read it, and it actually very clearly and very kind of nicely elaborates all of the points that I raised, that I discussed here, and with a lot of data. And I think that is something that the government must keep in mind, and implementing that report as soon as possible is something that should be the highest priority in this sector.
Yeah, no, fascinating, Saurabh. I think this was those unintended consequences were, I think, really well sort of fleshed out. And yeah, I actually look forward to reading some of your maybe opinion pieces that is, I would assume, is likely to be out in some time. So yeah, maybe we'll probably have another conversation a few months down the line when we have something more to work with as far as this moving into a law is concerned. But thanks so much. This was really helpful. I think it should aptly be titled as a primer on the Shanti Act. Because yeah, I can't think of many others who can speak with such authority, although I know you'll be quite modest about it. But yeah, thanks sort of for that. And yeah, it was good to have you on the podcast after a really long time.
Thank you, Carl. It's always happy to talk to you and to be on all things policy. I look forward to coming back soon, hopefully with a lot of good news in terms of the progress on the nuclear front. And to be honest, a lot is happening. There is something or the other, like some interesting news on this every few days. So a lot happening, and I hope the momentum keeps on going. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone for listening. See you another time.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.